I was given a specific homework assignment for this. This session is to help us start to think about strategy. Now, I don't know what strategy is. I looked it up and didn't like the definitions I found. I eventually found one I like. You know, I like Starbucks strategy. You know, create that third place, not home, not work, but that third place where you can go, sit down, meet some friends, chat, relax, affordable luxury, and by the way, buy some coffee, right? That's strategy. That strategy has led Starbucks to be, their stock price keeps going up. I wish I had invested. So when you're thinking about strategy, I want you to start thinking in very specific ways. So for the next few minutes, take notes on what your open data strategy is going to be based on where you sit. I'll give you one more quick example. You know, IKEA has a strategy where they're interested in being the low-cost solution for furniture. That means self-service, pick it up, it's easy to take home in your car. The strategy includes making it an experience. You know, you go there, you drive there, it's always in the suburbs, there's parking, it's a destination, you can eat there if you want. I wouldn't recommend it. And then they're also solving the worst part of buying furniture. It's not expensive. You can throw it away after a while. There's not millions of choices, there's 3 choices. And as a result, all of those aspects of their strategy reinforce one another. What is your open data strategy going to be? And a strategy is not just a plan to get to some desired future state. A strategy is an integrated set of choices which positions you relative to the environment to generate superior value over time. So remember, what are your internal activities? What are the choices you're making in your strategy? What is the external environment you're in? It could be other government agencies, it could be other advocacy groups. And then think about the competitive dynamics in that area. That's going to be your task by the end of this session. And we're lucky to help us think through how to do this by 3 very successful folks who've created their own strategies that have won and have provided value over time. First, directly to my left, is Regan Foust. Dr. Foust is the Senior Manager for Data and Research at the Lucile Packard Foundation for Children's Health. You know her from kidsdata.org, and if you haven't picked up one of these wheels from over there, you should. It has useful facts like 66.3% of children in LA are living with foreign-born parents. Very interesting, and many other facts. And something you didn't know about her, she shares a name with King Lear's evil daughter. And then next to her is Jason Lowley. Jason is the Open Data Program Manager for Data SF. He helps operationalize the city's open data strategy. Before that, he came from Denver, where he was the director of the Decision Lab at Place Matters. He is also a Nittany Lion, heavily involved in musical theater. Finally, we have Abhi Nemani. Abhi is the first Chief Data Officer for the City of Los Angeles, and before that he helped launch and build Code for America, which everyone knows. A little known fact about Abhi, he was his school's first prom king and prom queen simultaneously. So we will have time after this to network, and you can ask him about the details of that as well. So we're going to start first with, directly to my left, Regan. I think you have some slides for us. Is that right?
Yeah, it's okay.
No?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. Well, why don't you talk to us about civic engagement and what you did with kidsdata.org?
Okay, boy, nice to see everyone today. Thank you very much for having me. So, as you can tell, kidsdata.org, if you guys aren't familiar, it's a public use data site that displays information on child health and well-being in the state of California. So, So the question for me was, what does citizen engagement, user engagement, look like in terms of kidsdata.org? So the Lucile Packard Foundation for Children's Health, or a foundation that's dedicated to elevating the priority of children's health and well-being in California. And so we've always felt that the way to do that is to empower those who are working with and on behalf of children to use data in their work. It seems logical. So this could include policymakers, nonprofit service providers, people in the county and city governments, researchers, media, others who are working with and on behalf of children. So way back in the dark ages, like early 2000s, we had heard from them that they really wanted to use data in their work, but they encountered some challenges. So they may not have been able to find the data that they were looking for. It might not have been accessible, it wasn't available in a public way. It might not have been in a place where they could find it, so there was availability issues. They also encountered accessibility issues, and so maybe they weren't able to access the data using the software that they had. Maybe it wasn't presented in a usable form, or that they could understand what they were really looking at. Finally, maybe if the data was available or accessible, the resources that it would have taken to transform, to digest, to really understand the data and make it into something useful exceeded their resources or know-how at that time. And so we built kidsdata.org accordingly. So what we do is aggregate public use data sets into one convenient location. As you can see, it's a very streamlined design. Thank you, Google. We also allowed users to create custom visualizations. So this is just a very easy dynamic interface where people can make the data and visualizations look exactly the way that they need them for the exact question that they're wanting to answer, and then extract them and share them to those who they want to influence. So we also present updated and accurate contextual information, which I think is something that hasn't been brought up before in this conference. It's something that gets lost, and it's something that we really champion at kidsdata.org. So that comes to be important when making data understandable. You're able to put it into context of the field, but also in relation to other geographies that you're looking at. So that contextual piece we felt was very important. We also employ a variety of outreach measures. So, it had been brought up earlier in the day that maybe people don't know that data is available. And so we do a lot of work to make sure that people do know what they are looking for is available and updated. And we also collaborate with data sources. So this is very important, where our data sources and key partners, we work together to liberate data sets of interest. So there are always things that people are asking me for that just don't exist yet. And so we work hard to make sure that those are brought to light. So basically, we make the data easy to find, digest, use, and share. And that, to me, is what facilitates user engagement.
So tell me about contextual. Give me an example.
Contextual information. So an example of contextual information would be an example I was going to bring about making data available to the public was homeless public school students. So there really isn't a whole lot of information out there about that population, and I got asked about it many times. So I worked in collaboration with the California Department of Education, the Homeless Youth Project at the California Research Bureau, and the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth to liberate a data set that existed, just wasn't made publicly available. Now, with that, of course, we presented numbers and percents, tried to provide some other breakdowns that people would find important, but we felt like key to helping people understand that data was the why this topic is important narrative that was written using the best available resources in the field of homelessness. We provide research and links to updated articles and research reports, policy organizational briefs on the topic, as well as policy narratives, really, written by policy experts, so that you can really get a grounding in the issue and don't come away with maybe a different perspective than you might otherwise. Yeah.
There we go. Jason, tell me what you're most proud of in your open data accomplishments.
I think what I'm most proud of is I joined back in August, and first I want to say that Joy Bonaguro, who's our Chief Data Officer, would have loved to have been here, but she's going to be leaving on a much well-deserved vacation and couldn't join us today, but I hope I can represent the program well. So what I'm most proud of is that I joined Joy in August, and what's been, I think, really fun about what I'm doing is really getting to know the departments that we're working with across the city. So, Joy and I, we're a team of 2 on the Data SF team. There's only so much you can do by yourself. We really have to build coalitions within the city, and we're doing that really through our data coordinators. And I know it may sound like a fine point, but really getting to know those folks has been really wonderful. And I'm really proud that I'm finding that we're able to meet their needs and really help to shape the path for them to become active champions for the open data program at the city. And that's really where a lot of my focus has been up until really this April. We're going to be releasing our data set inventory for the city. So if this were a little bit later, I could have had this great announcement for you, but it's coming. But up until this point, it's really been about working with them, and also working with our with a little element of our community, this sort of civic hacker group that we have in San Francisco. In our case, it's called Code for San Francisco. Many of your communities may have similar groups. It actually came out of the sort of Code for America. It's a brigade, and I'm sure Abhi can speak more to that. But what's been wonderful about that is while we're sort of doing all this internal stuff where we have to get people on board, we're also working with this sort of layer of folks who are already bought into what we're doing. They're a good early test case for what we should be doing, and we frankly have to do better at meeting our non-technical users as well, and I think we're going to get to that in the next year, and the work that you're doing is a great example of what we as a program could do better at the city. But in the meantime, it's been really wonderful getting to know all of these people and really kind of crafting a set of programmatic elements that will eventually meet their needs on an ongoing basis. So really, it's been about laying the groundwork so that we can really put on the gas come April, May, June, when we've rolled out all of our sort of infrastructure.
Relatively new to California, but I understand there's a big competition between Northern Cal and Southern Cal, and SF and LA specifically. Abhi, you've been an army of one, supplemented by your vast Twitter following, I understand, really making changes in the city of LA. And you've gone a long way in a very short period of time relative to the maturity of what I understand is San Francisco's program. So what lessons do you have for folks in this room, and what have you been able to do, and where would you tell people who haven't really started down this pathway? Where do they start? What do they do? Where do they spend their time?
Okay, so a couple things to start. First of all, I would love a vacation, so Joy should tell me how she got that time off. Second, in terms of the prom thing, well, there was a strategy involved there that we can talk about after this is done. But more importantly and more appropriately, it's a great question, like, where do you start? So, I came into public service in September. I was working with governments beforehand in my role at Code for America, but not in government. And so it's been fascinating for me to figure out how you build an organization around open data and how you start to make that work. Before I go on, though, I just want to say that as someone who's studied closely the open data efforts around the world, actually, the work from the California state government around HHS open data has been remarkable. So everybody who's been a part of that, I just want to say congrats and well done. Can we just get a round of applause for that? It's been honestly just amazing to see what's been done. And so the question, right, Nirav, to your point, is what's next, right? What do we do after that, right? And I think we have to figure out what makes sense for other departments that aren't like HHS to do the same thing. And I think, and to Jason's point before, I think you start with an inventory, right? You start by assessing what data do you have that you can open up. But I don't think that's enough, right? Most people stop there and think that that's what you have to do is make an inventory, make a calendar around it. I actually think you have to think about strategy, right? And think about what are the big issues that you want to take on and how are you going to take those on, right? And open up data in that fashion and how do you engage people in that fashion, right? So if it's, so I'm from Los Angeles, right? So for us, it's water, right? Huge problem, right? There was actually a editorial in the LA Times last week that says, California may run out of water in 1 year. So that's what we should be focusing on, right? I mean, like, we can talk about some other stuff, and that matters, and that's cool, but, like, we're going to run out of water in a year. And so I would just say that we should think about how we align our strategic priorities with our open data efforts. So that's how I would organize a new kind of open data effort.
Jason, the same question about strategy. What is your strategy?
Yeah, so when Joy first started back in February, she came in fresh and new to the city of San Francisco. And what she first engaged in was really asking a bunch of questions of the organization. So she went throughout the city, interviews, questions, surveys, to really understand what the shape of open data was at the city already, and where it should go. And through that process, identified a number of sort of basic gaps that would identify the strategic direction for at least the first 3 years. Of course, what we're actually going through right now is revisiting that strategy. So one of the things that we do is we build in a revisit every year, and it's a flexible thing. And I think you have to maintain flexibility, especially in an environment as big and complex as the city. It changes as rapidly as it does. So out of that strategic document, which you can find at datasf.org/about, if you want to actually dig in, there are about 6 goals, and 3 of them really talk to just resetting the usability of our data. So speaking to context, speaking to all these other considerations, timeliness, basically 3 goals really speak to how do we just make this data usable and useful? And what falls out of those 3 goals is essentially a set of strategic initiatives that we've been working on to really, again, like I said, kind of shape the path in the right direction. So right now, for example, we want to make sure that when we publish data, we publish it in a way that people can actually use it. We want to make sure we get that right out of the gate, rather than having to fix that in reverse. I mean, we're not going to do ourselves any favors with that. So what we've done is we've developed a set of basically very, very simple business processes that help us move people through that, and that's been in coordination and in consultation with our partners at the city. So all that work has happened. We've reset our portal. We worked very closely with Socrata. Jessica Karsten is here. They really helped us reset the actual portal, and we did card sorting exercises to make sure that we had the right categories. So again, everything was framed through those really main 3 goals, and then additionally, we of course have goals to keep on top of innovation, and then enable confidential data sharing while appropriately protecting folks. So we kind of frame out these sets of goals, and we bake this into what we do, because quarterly we revisit those strategies and actually frame out our milestones for the next quarter. So we're very, very strategic in our approach, and we share all that online. So we're more than happy to talk to folks about what we've done at the city. It may not be appropriate for every context, but we think it does a pretty good job for us.
Yes, thank you. So when I think about strategy, I think about one of the things that really has made kids data look the way it does, and it may look very different, from some of the other open data portals that exist, and it's because our users are very different, and we find that that accessibility piece, that easy interface, the contextual information, the definitions and footnotes that are written by me to make sure that somebody doesn't come away with an inappropriate conclusion from the data is what stands out to me as very important. And I would consider that a strategy in itself, being very close to the users, understanding what they're asking for, so that informs the curation of what you find on kids' data, but also that the interface and the look and feel of it itself is incredibly important. I would also say, as a strategy, would be collaborations with other organizations. So I think that, data availability as a service might not be necessary for us to do that anymore. But that accessibility piece, I think, needs to evolve, and through collaborations, it might just be that when other data arbiters are making that data available and it looks good and it's accessible, that we might be able to work with them to provide other data that might not be available to them at that time. So I think that collaboration is key in all of this and has helped us throughout our process. And I just would love to work more with all of you guys. It's nice to be surrounded by like-minded people. So thank you.
So a quick poll. There will be a test, by the way, on strategy at the end of this session, and I will pick people at random. So I hope you have your strategic points down. Just kidding. How many folks here are in government? Vast majority. How many are in foundations? Yeah, you can raise your hands. How many are in private industries? Okay. How many lawyers in the room? Just one. Okay, back there. Trial lawyers don't count. Okay, so that gives us a good idea of our audience. It's a lot of government, and what I'm going to ask you now is, knowing who your audience is, what is the one thing that you want them to go back to their offices and do? Abhi.
I don't know if that's first. So I think the challenge, though, is you have to remember there's not just one audience, right? There's multiple, right? And so actually, can you show this? So this is the new Data LA site. So it's data.lacity.org. Jessica from Socrata helped me build this out. So what we did when we thought about this, and Nirav, it's to your point, right, which is like, what is the person that you want to have do something? What occurred to me when building this or thinking about it was that there's a couple of different, what you would call personas, right? If you're doing proper web development, that's what you consider them. So there's one, which is the developer, right? Like the tech geek, basically me. There's the journalist, right, who wants to use the data for analysis, right? There's the random person who just wants to see what the city's doing. And then there's the researcher who wants to do analysis on what the city's doing, right? So those are the four different personas that we, based on research, understood would be the key personas. And so we rebuilt our open data portal based on those different characteristics. Check it out. I would love your feedback. You can send me an email. It's abhi.nemani@lac.org. But here's what's interesting. We rebuilt it, and our bounce rate, so the people who came to the site and left right after that, went from 50% to 4% based on the redesign. 50 to 4. So, Nirav, to your question, right? Thinking about your users and designing for your users is massively important, right? Because you can make that kind of change. So I would just say that. And then if you can go to the next. So this is actually the next version of Socrates' view of data itself. Some of you have probably seen this. Maybe some of you haven't. Right, so you get people on the homepage, they get excited, they stick around, but at the end of the day, right now, what they see are basically spreadsheets, right? Just tables on a row, right? Now, it's going to change to this. And LA is the first city that actually has a visible view of the new version of the Socrata data view. So you can check it out yourself. It's prototype.datala.mobi. And you can see it, what it's going to be like for people to actually look at the data and interact with it. And for me, the reason this is interesting and exciting is that this helps people put data to work, right? You can actually click on a specific place or a specific chart or a specific part of the map and actually dive into that and see that data itself. And I think that's really the end goal that we have when we think about open data, is that we want people to actually understand what's going on, and this allows us to do that. So I have no idea if that answers your question at all, but I wanted to pitch those two things.
You know, you answer the question you want to answer. It doesn't matter what the question is. So very well done.
I do what I can.
To follow up with where Abhi started, and to try to also answer your question, I totally agree. Persona is really important, and I think what I'd add to that is if there's one thing you can do when you go back, it's just think about that. Think about what those personas are for you, and the ones that Abhi's using are actually, I think, exactly what we're using, which makes sense. So I think we call our researchers savvy analysts, but basically it's the same thing. So, basically go back, think about how you can start segmenting the folks that you really serve, and maybe you have subsegments, and especially if you're in a particular sub area. We at the city, sort of on the open data programs, we have to kind of serve more broadly, but within each of your fields, there may be folks that you really need to serve that are even sub to those. So think about that, and then I think about what you can do within those things with whatever resources you have. So maybe it's a portal, maybe it's not a portal play right now, but maybe there's a pilot project you can run where you get the data up on a FTP server that people can access. Think about what you can do, and then do it. You know, it's not always easy, but you can start, certainly. And the more people we have playing in this field, the easier it will become for us to collaborate with the state and with other counties and others. So definitely encourage you to start. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy all the time, although you'd be pleasantly surprised. It gets easier. And then I don't have any slides to show, but I encourage you to go to datasf.org/resources. We are posting all of our resources there. So one of the things that we're trying to do is share everything we do. So what's up there right now are our metadata standards, our data inventory process, and a handful of other things. Some licensing research that was done last summer, where we decided to release all of our data under a single license. And so we have all that up there, and we want people to use it and copy it and steal it. And you don't have to attribute us. It doesn't matter, because we're all in this together. And so I encourage you to go there. We're going to be relaunching datasf.org, the website, in a couple of weeks. So it will be a little bit fresher. And there will be, what we're going to be doing is datasf.org will become the programmatic website. So we'll have all sorts of insights and research and blog posts, et cetera, that we want to share with the community broadly. And then, of course, we'll continue to have the portal, and that will be sort of integrated into that experience. So we look forward to engaging with you on those resources, and feel free to reach out to us. I'm at jason.lally@sfgov.org. You can find me on Twitter as well. That's all I'll say about that. I think that answers your question. Regan?
Oh, we're not answering the question? What do you want to talk about? Perfect. I have the microphone. So, no, actually, what I wanted to say is that I second everything that you guys have said before about the audiences that you are serving, and I would actually add one more audience to that, and that's our main audience, which is the nonprofit service providers. And so we find that they, and this brings me to the point of kind of this strategy, is they have pretty different needs, and one of the things that they are looking to do oftentimes is demonstrate a need or justify a grant proposal or funding that they're seeking. And so, again, why Kids Data looks a little bit different is we really try to facilitate that process by providing that contextual information narratively, but also with the surrounding geographical context or time context, other ways where it's easily, you're easily able to see if an area is of need. So I would, respectfully submit nonprofit service providers, and also we've also found that there are a lot of individual county levels, obviously not your counties or your cities, but staff members who work in those organizations that actually don't have access or the ability to visualize their own data, or to make sense of it. And so I would think about them as well.
Great points. I'm going to open it up to your questions in just a minute, so please do think of your questions and get ready to raise your hands. Before that, I wanted to just echo something that I heard. And see how much this rings true for you. One of the things that we learned early on when we started our open health data portal was that many of the users were our colleagues, that public health wanted to write a grant, and so they could get the Medicaid data for the very first time on our own public health portal, rather than waiting for a request that would take 2 years somewhere on the list of Medicaid to fulfill that request. How many of you today have access to a data set that you think is valuable and should be released publicly, but is not readily accessible? Just a few. Okay, a few folks, good. How many of you are aware of someone else having data that you want and that you can't get your hands on very easily? Almost everyone in the room. Okay, so here you go. Yeah. So here is a specific call to action, and this is something that I would encourage all of you to do. When you get back to your offices, sit down and write out the Freedom of Information Act request for that data set. And if you get one of these requests, make sure that the data can be shared on the Open Data portal, one of many that you've heard of. And if you're making that request, make sure that you include on your request that you want to see it on the California website or one of the other websites. That's something we can all do and we should do. I mean, we're all here for a reason. We all drank the Kool-Aid long ago. But that alone, if 120 people wrote out Freedom of Information Act requests on Wednesday, because you're going to be here tomorrow too, that would be very powerful. So now I want to turn it over to questions from the audience. This is an incredible group. I've heard some great presentations, and I know that you have questions for our august panel. Is anyone willing to ask the first question? Yes, Andy Krakow.
He's a plan.
Thanks. Okay, so what I'm curious about, I mean, open data is so new, right? And I suspect it must keep you up at night because you've got to prove your worth to some degree to, city agencies that may not necessarily get it. What would be something, and Regan, you can answer this too from Kids Data's perspective. I know it's been around for, more than a decade, but what would be the one win that if you saw the community engaged in this way, it would not keep you up at night? It would make you think, we're onto something here. We're seeing the community engaged. And the second part of that question is, what would you need from others, it could be funders like my foundation, but others, to help achieve that? So there you go.
Well, I'd actually just put it out there that I was excited recently, so that homeless public school data was released in conjunction with our partners, and we got our socks blown off by the type of attention that was garnered because of it. And of course, we can't take credit for certain bills that are in session right now, but there are 6 substantive bills on child homelessness in session right now, and we can agree that it definitely garnered the type of attention among our core, our strategic audience that we would have liked to see. So that would be a great win for us.
I think at the local level in San Francisco, I mean, we do have a slightly more mature program, and I think a lot of work has been done there, and we were very lucky in that regard. There's still a lot of work to be done. I think in one of the places is actually intersects right here perfectly, is really getting out social services data at the local level and figuring out what data that we publish to the state, where can we coordinate with the state so that we're not duplicating effort, that we're actually in sync on that. So how can we federate the particular data sets that come out of our Department of Public Health? And I just think one of the things that, speaking to that would be exciting is if at the local level, one of the things that came out of our group earlier, we were having a conversation about this tension between having data published, but having it at the granular level level that you can actually do something interesting with it, but how does that intersect with privacy and various laws? And so there's a lot of brush clearing that we need to do all together, and Joy right now is working with our controller's office to really do some internal work around confidential data sharing, and that's not the confidential data sharing stuff is mostly about internal work, but it touches open data in the sense that some of that data will eventually go out. Not all of it, but some version of it may go out, and it's a pipeline. You can almost imagine it as a pipeline of data. And so, but in order to get it out to the public, we need to deal with all these upstream issues, and honestly, I mean, that's where I think funders and nonprofits and sort of the alignment of the state and city can really, really drive the innovation that we want to see in that space. So that's would be my vote, I think. But I'm sure there are lots of others.
So Andy, you and I have talked a lot about this, so this is a little unfair for us to talk about it. But so for me, I think more about strategy than tactics. And so what I would like to figure out are what are the metrics that we want to figure out? Like, what are the needles that we want to move around health, right? And then if we can figure out those and align on those, then we can figure out lots of different ways that we can actually move that needle, right? We can figure out lots of different tactics that we can use to actually make a difference. But I think the harder question is, what are those things that we think technology can change in terms of outcomes? And figuring out those things, I think, is really hard, but is what we have to do. Because once we figure that out, then we can use tons of different methodologies to get it done, right? We can do fellowships, we can do startups, we can do whatever, right? But I think the hard thing is we haven't actually figured out what those key measures are that we want to move. And until we do that, the other stuff doesn't matter.
Thank you. And I also noted that Damon, will come to you in a second. Andy also offered up resources, so find him in the break. The Health Foundation's willing to. LA, oh, you're first in line. Okay, Damon, sorry.
So my question is, one of the things that our CTO said to me was, if we never liberated another data set, we could probably extend our value tremendously by building community around the data. How do we So never having built data communities before, I'm struggling a little bit with what it is that I should be thinking about. Now, I'm curious to know if any of you all up there have thought less about the personas that are coming to your platform, but more about the communities that are continual sort of frequent flyers and users of your data, and how are you building out community in that way?
Yeah, okay, so that's a fascinating question and one that I think about pretty much every day, right? So I moved to LA from San Francisco, which is lovely. And LA doesn't have the kind of engaged civic tech community that a city like San Francisco has. And it doesn't have the same kind of community like Chicago has, or Boston, or Philadelphia. And my old job was working at Code for America, and we helped set up those communities there. And so what I did when I moved to LA was I studied closely what made those communities work, right? What made those happen. And there were 4 things that I figured out that actually made them work. And I can send you the document that I wrote up if you want it. But basically it's 1, a common identity. So having a brand of, it's code for Boston, or code for LA, or code for Chicago, right? Having common places where people come together. So Chicago has this weekly meetup where everyone comes together who's interested in this stuff, and it gets like 60 to 70 people. So that's a key thing. Third is having a kind of mechanism to fund people who are doing interesting things and help them make it not just a side project, but something that they can do full time. And so having a nonprofit or a foundation that can actually fund people to do things, taking it what they did in a weekend project to make it full time. And then finally having a megaphone, right? Where the mayor or a newspaper or somebody else talks about the great things that are happening, right? Philadelphia is a great example of this. They have a Technically Philly, where their main focus is on civic tech stuff, right? So I think those are the 4 key things that you really have to build to make the community work. I'm trying to do that in LA. It's hard because from a city perspective, you can't actually do that all yourself. You've got to get other people in the community to do it for you. And I think as those of us who work for government are thinking about this stuff, we have to think about that challenge. Sorry, I talked too long.
I'll just add one thing to that, which is that it's not necessarily a requirement, but it really, really helps. It's having the folks who really understand that data in the room, or in the room at some point in time. They don't have to be there all the time. But one very quick example that's sort of emerging right now is, and this kind of comes out of the sort of OpenGov transparency space anyway, so it's not really new, but it's a little bit new on the local level, which is campaign finance work. We have an ethics commission that is, I would call, a power user of our portal, and they have released a number of data sets around ethics. And simultaneously, folks in Oakland and San Francisco built some applications around the last election. They realized that they were both building similar apps. They got together, they started talking. Folks from the Ethics Commission actually came out to some of the nights, answered technical questions, got really engaged. And over time, this is built where now there is I'll call it statewide, but it's I think San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, and Sacramento are going to meet, I believe in April 12th, at a campaign finance summit. So to identify gaps and the challenges around this. So they're building a community, and it all came out of this sort of network of networks and having those engaged folks there. So I think it's definitely very possible to build those communities.
I couldn't agree more with what Jason said. Us being statewide and providing data at a state level, but also down to the local level, we actually are very hesitant to talk about things that are going on in an individual community, because we find that we couldn't possibly know all the things that are going on at an individual community level, and each one is so different in California. So having the people who actually know what they're talking about, who live in that community, who are experts in the topic, inform that discussion is key.
Thank you. Yes.
So one more question, kind of along the same vein, but when you think about, Abhi, back to your point of we've got these, strategic imperatives we're trying to execute on. If we started, right, prom. So you want to be prom king and queen in this scenario. Walk me through this. No. So let's say you have something that, we've identified this strategic imperative. We know we want to execute on it, which given that's a big leap that we even got there. But in the spirit of building these communities and understanding that some folks in the private sector are going to have some particularly valuable data sets that maybe could contribute to this, how do you, or what examples have you seen to incentivize the sharing of data like that? And I guess maybe is that even kind of worth pursuing? Or just comment on that, because I think there's, I'm going to point fingers a little bit, but we've got Kaiser and we've got Lucile Packard up there. I know those EMRs are rich with data as one example, right? But that's proprietary info. We obviously have to de-identify it, blah, blah, blah. We used the grocer example earlier. They might have some really great data on, what's going on at the community level. Just kind of talk me through that. What have you seen work? What have you seen not work?
So let me start by being new to Kaiser Permanente, so I don't speak on behalf of Kaiser Permanente at all. I can just say my personal opinion. And I agree that there is extremely valuable data sitting in the servers in Oakland around every single BMI from all of our members from all ages across the state of California that could create, and I've seen the perfect BMI map that's de-identified, that's aggregated, that's not, creepy, but priceless. It is priceless if we could get that data out on the open data portal. And I would suggest that folks ask my boss or my boss's boss for that data and say this is part of what California needs from Kaiser Permanente, that we need to understand our members and our citizens in ways that you already do. We could draw perfect maps of how people get to work, how people get to clinics, and see what the transportation grid of the future should look like based on data that already exists in our servers. And that's not proprietary. That's not a business imperative. That's not something that I have to worry about releasing. But if you knew so I have my own Freedom of Information Act request that I have to write up when I get home on Wednesday as well. And I agree. I think if you look across the healthcare delivery system, there are many more examples along that get to very hard questions like how do we address the social determinants of health in ways that we don't have good answers today, but the answers do exist in large companies.
Well, so first thing I'm going to do is FOIA all of Nirav's past emails. I would. So to me, it's a great question, right? Because I think this is a really important point for people to think about when they're thinking about open data. Is all of us think about building new apps and building new interfaces that people will download and use on their phone. I heard an interesting stat one day that 95% of iPhone apps are opened once. So just think about that for a second. So basically, most apps are never used more than one time. So to me, that makes me think that we should think about making other apps more civic, right? How do we integrate the data that we're opening up into the experiences that people use every day? And we've got great examples, and Greg Bloom, who's here somewhere, can talk about the example of how we used restaurant inspection scores and integrated that with Yelp. We integrated building inspection data with Zillow. But like that, to me, is the question we should be answering, right? Which is, how do we take the data that we're opening up and put it from the back of the store into the palm of people's hands, right? And we can do that now, right? We can do that. And so let's figure out how to get that done.
Jason mentioned the possibility, or at least the dream, of aggregating data across state and local open data sets. And it strikes me that that would create a robustness and rich set of data that's much greater than perhaps any individual participant could provide. But how would we go about doing that? How would you see us moving forward to create that kind of connection between local open data sources and state data sources, and perhaps even federal? Is there a need, for example, for standards in terms of metadata or some way to expedite that connectivity between federal, state, and local open data portals?
I'm going to ask for a phone a friend, because I think I see Esty in the crowd here, and I know she's given a lot of thought to this and has been one of the leaders in California's movement. Maybe perhaps you might want to answer that?
You owe me one. So absolutely, yes, there's a need for data standards. In fact, one of the things that we discovered this morning when we were doing the exercise was that a lot of people had trouble with the fact that we had to look up CABG. And not everybody knew that CABG was coronary artery bypass graft. So, you know, just that one simple example kind of highlighted that, you know, you have to really understand standards, semantics, nomenclatures, who your audience is, and how to make things searchable for them. You know, it's one thing to put the data up there, but if nobody gets it, it's not going to be helpful. So yes, absolutely, no question. I'm a huge proponent of standards, and I think we need to adopt nationally known standards, not make up our own. California likes its own standards sometimes, but I think that we have enough thought leaders here who are open to and proponents of using national data standards. And I forgot the second part of the question. How do we do it? Oh, and the federated part. Thank you. Well, we do it by just agreeing on national standards and starting to implement them. It will take, you know, every organization going through their workflow to do that correctly. But absolutely, you get more value when you are able to federate data. I know HHS has been doing that. You know, I pointed out with our solution, we've got a federated site. And really, users need the opportunity to not know which organization they have to go to get their data. They've got to go to, you know, a couple of well-known places, one ideally, but I doubt that'll happen, and be able to find the data they need quickly. And I think everybody's mentioned we have the technology to do that. So that's going to create value and opportunity when people do develop the applications that will be opened more than once.
So we started this session by talking about what strategy is, and I defined it as strategy being an integrated set of choices which positions you relative to the environment to generate superior value over the long run. And I'm coming away from this saying that any open data strategy has to have several pillars. The pillars that I heard may be different than the ones that you've heard, and I encourage you to start putting your own strategies together. But I heard that one of the policy strategies is around support of our nonprofit community partners. How can we better help them do what they do every day? Another is around building community around the data. A third is consumer-centric, or personas. You know, as healthcare becomes more retail, so too does open data, and we need to be consumer-centric when we think about our strategy. Usability has been a theme we've heard over and over again, and that's beyond just consumer-centric, but how do you make your data usable? And that may be mapping, it may be geocoding, it may be other ways that we can think about it. And finally, policy. Think of imagine the possibilities, how many dollars of lobbyists you can save if you just put out the right data set and get 6 bills written around it. I mean, that's fantastic. And those are the bills that no one would champion in the past, but with the nice bright light shown on the data, no one can ignore anymore. Over the next few days, I hope that California gets a whole bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests. Enjoy your day, enjoy the evening. We have a networking session coming up after this, and thank you all for your participation.